Hello and welcome to Monarchist Minute. I am Charles York, head publicist, joined with me by.
I am Victor Smith. I am a diplomat of Monarchist America.
William Stout. I am Vice Chancellor, second in command, and will be taking the role of our Chancellor, who tonight is having some technical difficulties and unfortunately cannot join us.
Well, we have three topics up for discussion tonight, and our first topic is Afghanistan, where the situation continues to degrade as the Islamic Emirate has been proclaimed, and American civilians are still struggling to find their way to an airport, while British and French civilians are being escorted out by military convoys from their respective nations. But we seem too cowardice to do it ourselves because of the State Department or whatever.
It,
Victor?
not to cut you off there, but I think it's because of the president's incompetence and wanting to dial back our military involvement to near nil that we're having so many issues getting our people out of there. He should have gotten all of the ancillary support staff out of there before getting the military out of there. But because he failed to do that, he decided we are in this sort of a chaotic mess. I'm sure everyone here has seen the video of people falling to their deaths because they grabbed landing gear of the airplanes to get to in an attempt to escape Afghanistan with on an American plane.
Yeah, this whole situation speaks to the incompetence of the federal government in general. Supposedly, there were reports available to President Biden and his staff that Afghanistan was not going to last very long as soon as American troops pulled out, and he still decided to do it anyways, which is something that I think Obama gave that promise, President Trump gave that promise. But I think that they realized, especially Obama, after the whole Iraq incident when he pulled out, creating ISIS, that you don't just pull out of a country in that manner. But apparently, Biden didn't get the memo.
And this is especially damning on Biden because he was President Obama's vice president.
Yeah.
Anyway, our Chancellor, John Amos, has actually joined us. So, John, if you'd like to introduce yourself.
Hello. I am I am the Chancellor of the Monarchist of America. I'm John Arness, and yeah, I'm the leader here.
Okay.
We're kind of off to a rough start. This is Monarchist Minutes, and thanks to our lovely publicist, we might be able to make this somewhat salvageable. But yeah, as far as Afghanistan goes, it's completely mismanaged, and instead of having a militarily supported retreat, we're having the carriage before the horse. And now there's an entire new problem that comes about. How do you, without a military, move an entire population of Americans from Afghanistan out? And this is something that Trump took into account. This is not something that Biden took into account, apparently. So we don't know. We don't know what's going to happen. I'm hopeful. I hope it's not going to be a bloodbath. I hope they will not take these people hostage, but it doesn't look very good. Currently, we're going off of what the Taliban has to say about it, and I don't trust a single word the Taliban says, so I don't know what's going on. It's just a horrifying situation. Yeah.
And
That's my 2 cents, introduction 2 cents to the situation.
And I don't think that we should just say what they're doing wrong. Obviously, we need to, figure, because obviously it's easy enough to point to blame without offering your own solutions. So I think that here's my sense on how we could have improved the situation. When the former king of Afghanistan came to President Bush and said, "Hey, maybe we should try restoring the monarchy," that would have been the infinitely better option, because liberal democracy is not particularly a well-known concept to the Afghan people, culturally speaking. It's not something that they've ever really had. Whereas with the Western society, it was sort of this almost natural, quote unquote, even though I don't really consider liberal democracy a natural state, this sort of natural progression of ideas that propped up over centuries, starting with the
Well,
Enlightenment kind
I
of.
wouldn't necessarily say it was natural. I mean,
Well,
it
yeah.
isn't really democracy. Well, it is. I mean, a lot of Western civilizations' democracies are built on the British and American form. So it's kind of weird, because we kind of during the Cold War, we kind of enforced our culture on the crumbling, like, Europe. So it's weird. I wouldn't necessarily call it central. What's up? Somebody has a question. Looks like.
But before we do that, can I weigh in real quick?
Sure.
Sure.
Go ahead.
Personally, I was all for withdrawing from Afghanistan, sink or swim, but I do agree Biden ripped off the band way too quickly, and the fact that he didn't even think about getting citizens on board.
You're kind of cutting out.
Yeah.
We will
Um,
invite
and I do like
Vincent now to speak.
and I do like the idea of restoring the monarchy, like Charles said. All right, Vincent.
Yeah.
What's up?
Oh, okay. Here we go. I didn't see the little button that said accept.
Hey.
But my first question is just for the benefit of the audience in general, which is that I want to know what the etiquette is for audience speaking. Specifically, is our role to ask questions to the hosts, or do you want us to weigh in and give commentary of our own?
I think the latter. Unless John wants
Yeah,
to.
Really. All of the above. The point of having the live studio audience was to
initial
allow
idea
members.
was like at a Q&A section at the end. I think the idea was a Q&A
Yeah.
at the end. But
My point
we can do
being
whatever.
that on on the topics that have been presented, I can weigh in on a couple of these, but I don't know if you want me to.
You have something insightful. I see no reason why you can't go ahead.
Okay, right. So on the first issue, on one of the things that was talked about just a moment ago, about the idea of American democracy being natural or not natural, I happen to be studying this in graduate school vaguely at the moment, and so I can tell you, to keep things as simple and as brief as possible, that regardless of whether we decide that republics are a natural state, we can at least agree that they are our idea. That when we formed our constitution and formed our republic, we did so using an ideology that had been forming over the course of centuries at least. That is to say that John Locke, for instance, who came a century prior and whose ideas are foundational to the principles of American republicanism, was himself an Englishman who I believe lived in America for some time, and the founding fathers are aware of all of these thinkers. Aware is the key word. The Afghan people are not aware of any of this stuff, and I spoke to, or a couple of years ago, I remember having a conversation with an army sergeant who was in Afghanistan at the time, and this was before talks of withdrawal were underway. And when the question was posited to him how the war is ever going to end, he explained that schools were being built in Afghanistan that would help the Afghan people understand the value of the government we're trying to build there. That would indicate to me that in order for the Afghani people to accept what we're trying to build in their country, they have to be like us, which is a critical oversight in foreign policy, and I think goes some way to explaining why we haven't been able to build a successful government there at all, which is quite simply we haven't even bothered to consider what it is that what their needs actually are. So I agree with Charles at the end of it, which is that we should have been in cooperation with the king of Afghanistan from the very beginning, simply because Afghanistan, as I know it, is a nation that is still governed mostly by tribes and by tribal leaders. And in the old days of the Afghani monarchy, the state was governed through coordination between the king and tribal leaders, almost in a feudal style. That's the way Afghanistan is structured, and even when we were in Afghanistan, when we had control of most of Afghanistan, we were trying to cooperate with tribal leaders in order to get their support. But of course, if our government depends on the wholesale re-education of the entirety of Afghanistan, how can we expect their cooperation?
Of course, you're absolutely right, Vincent. Just wanted to piggyback and say that there is no word in Arabic for the term democracy. Do I have that right?
You would have to ask my Maronite right cousins.
Well, from what I understand, there is no word in the Arabic language for democracy. That's how foreign of a concept it is to the Islamic world, that in their language of the Islamic world, the common language of it, there is no word for our governmental system, which is why we needed to restore the Afghan monarchy and not allow the radical fundamentalist Islamists in the Taliban to have that kind of control. And I think that the other Vincent Wilhelm, wanted to speak.
Yeah. There we go.
Hello?
Oh, yep, we can hear you.
Thank you. So, thank you for letting me speak. I just wanted to
And you're
bring...
you're golden.
You're cutting out again, John.
Vincent, did you have anything else to say?
Yes, I wanted to come off the ironically the other Vincent's point. Ironically, have the same name. I think along with the education, I think that he brought up a fantastic point with the education thing, and you bringing up that there isn't actually an Arabic word for democracy, so they have a little to no understanding of our system. How, along with this, I think we also need to address the fact that how do I put this into words? It's a foreign, and putting a foreign concept into an entire nation is an extremely difficult process in and of itself. So along with all of those problems already associated with little to no understanding, the Republic of Afghanistan, I'm referring to the administration before the Emirate, the one that was just overthrown under President Ghani. I believe I'm getting that name correct, right?
Yes.
President Ghani, yes. From my understanding, the administration, not the military, the government, the Afghan military is an entirely different story. The Afghan government was not exactly the most effective administration, from what I've been told, from what my sources have told me. It was, at least under Ghani, I've heard, was not a very, shall we say, transparent administration. I heard there were corruption and things to that sort. And when you're already trying to put in a foreign concept into the nation. Combine that with regular things of corruption, this is where we're starting to have a problem. And I think it trails back to, again, the other Vincent's point of restoring the Afghan monarchy and how they worked with tribes. Working with tribes is a lot easier, at least in my view, where you're working with the system that they are used to, and you're not trying to force another system onto them.
Okay, thank you very much for your contribution. Please go back to me. Thank you.
Yeah. Okay, so
Um,
Really?
We also have another request to speak, did
well,
we?
I said that we're going to try to enforce the end of the show thing because
Okay.
we must make at least an effort to play by our own rules. You're welcome, Vincent. And John, William, you were both trying to speak at once, and you were both kind of cutting out.
yeah.
But
You can go first.
it really amounts to the fact that the U.S. foreign policy has been dominated since the end of World War I by Wilsonianism, and that is the idea that American democracy, American republicanism, can be used as a universal model to basically rebuild and reform any country on the planet, damn the consequences.
Yeah.
And
Yeah, I mean,
fundamentally wrong.
yeah, I mean, the thing is too is that we in our own homeland we are already seeing the consequences of the sort of liberal republic that we have over here, and we're seeing that we're dying a slow death. So enforcing that onto Afghanistan, in hindsight, although it wasn't as obvious in 2001 2002 when we went in, although you could certainly see society starting to crumble even back then. In hindsight, the choice of giving them liberal democracy or radical Islamism, you can kind of see why it's a catch-22 for the Afghan people either way, because they're either getting a concept that is foreign and hostile, especially to Islam, because Islam, from my understanding, admittedly, I'm not an expert on the topic, but in order to practice Islam to the truest extent, it also has to involve the political structure, with Sharia law and whatnot, and that there are certain types of governments that are, acceptable under Islam. So trying to enforce that, and so it's either a choice between a hostile religion, fundamental whatever, right? Because the
Yeah.
corruption of the best is the worst, which the corruption of true religion, which is the best thing ever, is the worst. So therefore, you get that.
Yeah, and
Political
the
machine you
thing,
refer to.
and
Sorry.
I agree. Yeah, it's all right. I like the idea because in the Middle East, historically, it's been the best thing that a monarchy, a modern kind of monarchy, is good for the Middle East, because a monarch, I believe Charles Cullen did a video on this, where a monarch's able to weigh the different groups within a nation and kind of be the central glue that holds the country together. We've seen that in the Middle East a lot, because the way the Middle East is set up, it's a very diverse place, and the borders of each nation in the Middle East is divided weirdly, and you have multiple cultures, and like the Kurds. The Kurds are divided between multiple Middle Eastern countries, and a monarchy is really the only thing that could keep, in my view, in my opinion, keep Afghanistan together in its current form. It now, it might not collapse necessarily, but it's only going to be replaced by dictator or Islamic dictator, or quote unquote Islamic republics, or emirate or whatever, it's not necessarily, it's just going to devolve or collapse. It's like what happened with Saddam Hussein. You end up with a strong man taking the place of what would be a king that unites the different subcultures of a country. You have a strongman dictator to kind of, or a religious dictator, like we see in Iran, that kind of uses religion to form a totalitarian state. So yeah, that's kind of what's going to happen in Afghanistan if a monarchy isn't established, which it's probably not going to be. I mean, we can hope. I hope, but that's the best alternative there, I would say, is a monarchy, like Charles said. I like the idea, but we're fixated on our democracy, which we're not necessarily democracy. We're a representative republic, and that kind of weird democratic fixation has gotten us into many of people's pies and many of different situations over the course of ever since we entered the world stage. Many would consider that World War One with Wilson and stuff like that. We're the arsenal of democracy. We're the leaders, we're the leader of the free world, and we're going to enforce democracy wherever we go. And that ham-fisting representative republics or representation in a weird way they're not used to is going to be disruptive to the country, and we've seen that.
Yeah.
All right, and since we were talking about Afghanistan as well as Islam, we have a Muslim in our server, Wandering Theist. I have invited him to speak on this issue because he might have some insight that us non-Muslims might
Yeah.
have. Yeah.
And since One Theist didn't show up before we gave the rules, please refrain from swearing, William. Okay.
I've been very good. I only said it once, and it was in good context.
Okay.
Yeah, I'm very good at toning myself down when I need to, so that's good.
Theist, I think you have to go.
I said, and I sent the. All right.
There we go.
There we go.
There we
Hello.
go.
Hey, hello.
Hello.
Welcome to the show. What's up?
I see. So, what kind of questions did you guys have? What's the context there?
I guess, namely, the relationship between Islam and governance, and is even the liberal republic that we try to build in Afghanistan even compatible with Islam, which, as everybody knows, is the majority religion of Afghanistan?
Oh, heavens no. No. So Islam's position. Islam is not a democratic system of like governance, right? Like Islam supports monarchy, right? So the future of Afghanistan is it's going to become an emirate, and which is essentially a form of monarchy, and it's going to be governed by Sharia law. I mean, it's pretty straightforward. Now, in terms of the Taliban specifically, that's a little bit more complex question. So the Taliban is a Deobandi sort of movement, right? So the Deobandis, they exist in Pakistan and Afghanistan, and there's sort of like a divide, if you will, between sects and viewpoints that exist in the India, Afghanistan, and Pakistan region, and sects that exist in the Middle East, right? So they have kind of analogous sort of movements in the Middle East, but they're very distinctive, if you will.
Okay, and just as more of a linguistic question, I had made the point that there is no word for the term democracy in Arabic. Can you fact check me on that?
I'm sure that there is a word for democracy in Arabic. I'm not sure what that would be specifically off the top of my head, but I mean, yeah, there's certainly a term for it. Yeah.
Okay.
I mean,
It's just it's not it's not an Islamic system of governance is all.
Okay. And we were making the further point before you came to the show, or before you listened in, that the United States rejected the offer to restore the old Afghan monarchy. Do you think that? How do you think? Had we accepted the restoration of the offer to restore the Afghan monarchy, how do you think the war on terror would have played out differently?
I don't think I don't think you would have been successful against the Taliban either way. The fact of the matter is the Taliban has a lot of support within the Muslim world, right? Like, and it's not necessarily exclusively like ideological support, right? So that's not to say that the majority of the Muslim world agrees with the Deobandi philosophy. That's certainly not a truth. But the Taliban is viewed as being a very genuine resistance movement, right? Like the Taliban is viewed as the vanquishers of the communists, right? And now the only Muslim resistance to have expelled the United States, right? Like they have almost kind of like a mythical status about them that leads to a lot of support in the Muslim world. So I don't think with the kind of reputation the Taliban had and continues to have, not just in Afghanistan, but throughout the Muslim world, I don't think that the war would have played out any differently.
So you're saying that they would anything that we did with Afghanistan, they would have just viewed the established government as our pawn, essentially, sort of like how the Soviet-backed communist state was just their pawn.
Essentially, yes. I think anything that was short of an emirate under Sharia law and under Islam would have been rejected by the Taliban, right? Like Islamic theological kind of monarchy is different than kind of any sort of like hereditary or like westernized sort of monarchy, right? Like the monarchy of Islam is very integrally tied into the religion, and with that comes the implication that the religious rulings and laws and so forth are going to be the supreme law of the land. Anything short of that, I don't think would have been accepted.
So, yeah, so one of the things that, once Christian monarchy became a thing, and the aftermath of people converting to Catholicism, was the notion that the throne was supposed to protect the altar. Although obviously in Islam, I don't think you have altars, but it's essentially the same notion there that the rulers are supposed to uphold the religious law as supreme within their own states.
Precisely.
Yeah.
Yeah, and and I believe the first Christian monarchy was, or I say Christian Catholic, or before the councils,
Schism?
was, I believe, Armenia. So it's woven into Catholicism too, at least pre-council Catholicism. That monarchy is kind of connected. I mean, we have a hierarchy, at least in Catholicism, aside from just general Christianity, is a monarchy in a sense, because we have patriarchs, and it might not be hereditary, but we're led by a monarchy. At least the Papal States is a monarchy. So at least in Catholicism, and we've been moving away from it, I believe, probably ever since the 19th 20th century. But it's still at the root of Catholicism is monarchy, because you can't really because Christ is supposed to be a monarch of sorts, and that's just generally speaking. I believe that's in just Christianity in general is sees Christ as a king of sorts, which is ironic, and Protestantism kind of support this.
Well, yes.
Historically have supported since its existence a republic. Yeah,
Well, you really only had
it's interesting, because the older religions, what I notice is the older religions you have is because Orthodox,
Yeah.
I would imagine the Orthodox support a monarchy
Well, I
too.
mean,
Or not Orthodox supporting it, but their foundations would lend itself to monarchy.
yeah. Well, I
You were
mean,
saying?
with regards to Protestantism, and I think this is something that William would disagree with me on, but you really can't have the revolts against the throne that we have seen in the last couple centuries first without Luther's revolt against the altar, because the two concepts were integrally linked, in that the throne was supposed to protect the altar, and in the case where you had three popes, occasionally the Holy Roman Emperor would just have to say no, bad anti-popes, but although that only really happened the once. You know,
Yeah,
but I guess
religion and governance is definitely synthetic. Like there needs to be a mutual coexistence and
Yeah.
Well,
uplifting
and
of both, or one is going to go out of control or the other. You were
I
saying?
think I think one point I think one point was made earlier too, where we kind of discussed Christianity and how democracy and like this kind of like liberal Republican kind of ideology is not biblical in origin, right? Like the Bible
Yeah.
is a system of monarchies. It's not a system of governments by the people for the people. And I guess kind of one of the points of Islam, and especially of movements like the Taliban, is that there's a degree of hypocrisy in that, right? Like the West criticizes the Taliban for being this brutal regime or whatever, right? And the Taliban in turn criticizes the West for claiming to be Christian, but in fact not actually following the system that's laid out in the Bible, right? Like not actually being in touch with those roots.
Yeah, and I mean,
Yeah, and it's
the issue though is that, and once again, I'm sure William would disagree with me. The problem with Luther's revolts against the altar is that once you can do that, ultimately anything can and ultimately does go. And in a sense, even though there are still some in the Catholic Church who kind of come in and they want to sort of adopt these same ideals that we can just change things. And I think that, especially in regards to church and state. Now, one of the dogmatic views of the Catholic Church that has always been the case up until recently was that other religions should only be tolerated if not tolerating them would produce a greater evil. And so, in a sense, obviously, don't kill them, but you would really only tolerate another religion, assuming that not doing so would produce a greater evil, sort of similar to just war theory, where you would only get involved if not getting involved would produce more evils.
Yeah.
And
that kind of took a hit
that
with
teaching changed. Well, I mean,
that kind of took a hit with England. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, I mean, that teaching changed, I think, only after the temporal authority of the Pope had kind of been stripped away from him. I guess, the temporal authority of the Pope had kind of been stripped away with him with the whole unification of Italy, which is something that I am vehemently opposed to. And so now that the Pope really didn't have to rule anymore, and his temporal authority was sort of stripped away from him, he sort of, once again, I'm not, the papacy never will and never has fall into heresy, but in terms of these non-dogmatic teachings, has sort of, kind of lost touch with reality. And I mean that in the nicest possible way, I guess. And then also the fact that, the whole multi-tolerance of freedom of religion seems to be working, because at the time of the Second Vatican Council, our republic seemed to be working, with the whole freedom of religion, and Catholics weren't getting their heads chopped off, despite the fact that we were a vast majority in the Protestant country. So at the time, it seemed to be working. So I can understand why those sorts of, this sort of embracement once again a non-dogmatic matter, so therefore it's not really heretical. But this notion of oh, freedom of religion, wonderful thing. But
Well, I think
I mean, the
Oh,
only
Monarchy.
the thing about freedom or separation of church and state. Oh,
Yellow Monarchist, and then he
the
can.
separation of church and
please.
state comes. I believe it. Okay, there you go.
I need to weigh in at
The
some
mic.
point.
What's up? Yeah, you were saying, wondering.
Well, I think when it comes to like religious freedom, right? At least from our perspective, like the idea is that what is your land is your land, right? Like I don't think it's necessarily oppressive for a religious majority to institute their own laws within their own land, right? So like freedom of religion can go too far too, right? Like from our like if the United States were to become a monarchy tomorrow, right? Like our religion would have no qualms with, the Christian monarchy, deporting every Muslim, right? Because Muslims are considered to be guests in that land, right? Whatever religious majority is, I feel is entitled to enact their religion in that land in any way they see fit.
Yes.
If I may.
Well,
Yes,
the
William.
way Catholicism sees it. Oh, what's up? Oh yeah, William.
was. Oh, and then.
First thing, I appreciate the fact that you'd say, I'm fairly certain I would disagree with you, but you and I both know that if we start that argument here, it'll be Diet of Worms 2, Electric Boogaloo, and we will not talk about anything else this evening. Second thing, I want to backtrack for a moment about Islam and politics. I was wondering if Wandering Theist would like to explain the concepts of the Ummah and the caliphate to those of us who are Christian, and we hear the concept caliphate a lot, especially in regards of what ISIS was, and I was hoping that maybe Wandering Theist would actually help explain a little bit what a caliphate actually is.
Yeah, so this this is what is a caliphate is going to be a question that's going to be answered a little bit differently by every sect of Islam. Like one of the kind of defining debates between Shiites and Sunnis are it regards with like what is this question, like who's entitled to become caliph. But what everyone kind of agrees on is that the Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him, issued an edict saying that Muslims are obligated to follow the majority, right? The majority of the Ummah and their leader, right? Was the verbatim kind of terminology, right? The majority of Muslims have to have a leader. And so the caliph is considered to be the leader of all Muslims, not just one specific sect, but all Muslims worldwide. And the one who holds that position is kind of, and also, has the support of the majority is by default the caliph. Now, caliph is a religious and a political post, right? So the caliph is expected to be an expert in religious and political affairs and governs a caliphate. Essentially, there's different governance within the caliphate, right? So like you have a sort of almost like a federal government, if you will, right? Like you have the caliph, and then below him you have individual monarchs of individual countries that are the governors, which are appointed and have sworn loyalty to that caliph. There's debate as to whether or not the caliph should be hereditary, or whether the caliph should be elected, or whether a council of religious scholars should appoint a caliph. But that's kind of the nuts and bolts of it.
And has there?
And I just have to interrupt because I know William wanted to make a point for the longest time, so I'm going to hand it off to him.
No, that was my point.
Oh, that was your point.
Okay. I guess seeing as how we've taken up a lot of time on the topic of Afghanistan, have sort of wandered off topic into Catholic and Islamic political structures.
Well, that cover church and state and all that mess.
Yeah, well, I guess before we say goodbye to Wandering Theus, who's sort of been our helpful expert, who's been impromptu on the subject. Well, I'm sure he would be a little more humble as he's not necessarily an expert.
Definitely not.
Yeah. I guess we're gonna see if Wandering Theus has any thoughts, and then we'll have our final thoughts on Afghanistan, and then move on to our second topic, which is actually our third topic.
Yeah, I have nothing else.
Okay. I guess
All right, thank you
what I
for
would
your
say.
time.
Yeah. Thank you.
Yep, anytime, man.
Okay. I will forcefully move you to audience using my unlimited power. But then there were 4. All right. So I guess my final thoughts on Afghanistan. I, as a Catholic integralist sort of, dealio kind of guy, I think that the truest expression of any state is that firstly it be Catholic, and then as a monarchist, the truest expression is both Catholic and royal. And I think that that applies to any state, although it may not seem that way, and it's going to be a lot of work. And Afghanistan does have a lot of stuff in its culture, I think, that is, I guess, provo evangelicum, or I'm probably mispronouncing that, says the guy who took 2 years of Latin. Preparation for the gospel. And, any missionary work in Afghanistan now, especially, is going to be faced with a tremendous uphill battle, especially considering how I've heard that the small Christian minority within Afghanistan, which is so small that Wikipedia doesn't actually have a separate page for Catholics in Afghanistan, or I guess Orthodox in Afghanistan. It's just Christianity in general in Afghanistan. They're going around, and the Taliban is seeing, if they have Bible apps on their phones and rounding up and shooting them. So anything in regards to missionary work in Afghanistan now is going to be dangerous, and frankly, God bless them, and I mean that to the entire Afghan people, because they need it.
Yeah.
I guess to Victor, and then to William, and then to John, because that's the order that appears on my screen.
Okay. I think that I think that lost in all of our discussion was the plight of our dead soldiers. We lost thousands of people in Afghanistan, and even more to suicide afterward. If you are feeling suicidal or are having thoughts of suicide, please know that you are not alone, and call the National Suicide Prevention Hotline.
Yeah.
People will want to talk to you, or if you don't want to talk, you can send a text, or you can go to the National Suicide Prevention Hotline website for more details on how you can contact them and how they can help you. Now, with that being said, with that plug being over, those soldiers, as of this point, you have a really good case to make that those soldiers died in vain, and billions upon billions of dollars was spent in a money pit.
Yeah.
And I think that it really needed to be said that our thoughts and prayers are out to the Gold Star families of our dead soldiers who died in Afghanistan. Anyway, William, go ahead.
I just gotta say, this war really ended up being our generation's Vietnam. 20 years, $2.2 trillion. I forget the exact statistic, but it's like 26,000 dead Americans, even more dead Afghanis. This really was a horrific end to what seemed to be a rapidly hopeless and pointless conflict. And while I'm personally happy to see that it's over, and I thought we were there for way too long. I mean, it's sad that when that war began, I was not even 1.5 years old and couldn't make memories of my own, and now I'm 21, graduated from high school, getting ready to go back to college, have a full-time job, a mortgage, 2 cars, full adulthood, and the war is just now ending, and we don't have anything to show for it. And I really think that if this war doesn't call us to completely reject and rethink our foreign policy, then we have truly failed as a country.
John?
I mean, when William said it's our generation's Vietnam, it is. I mean, I lost a grandparent to Vietnam, so it really becomes a problem when we're not fighting our own war, and we've established a very vague and very loose war definition of nation building and things like that. Our intent there was to not build up Afghanistan to be this new country. It was to kind of seek out those who have attacked America. It wasn't what it was ended as. The whole concept of nation building is something that should have never come into existence, because once we do that, we put our guns in somebody else's hands. We did that with the Vietnamese, and we're doing that with the Afghans. I don't think it's a good idea, and the best thing for Afghanistan now is to have their own government, and for us to be completely independent from them. We've needed to get out of that sphere for a very long time. I'd say we spilt enough blood over there. We spilt enough soldiers' blood over there. And a lot of young men have wasted their lives in a pointless and high-strung war that has these big, vague war goals, and it just becomes a problem with many people, because 2 generations could have fought in this war. 2 generations. 18-year-old going into Afghanistan could have had a child who was 18 going into Afghanistan today. It's crazy. It's ridiculous. There was no real point after the first year or so of the war. We should have been out fairly early. We should have been out at that time. Taliban got involved. It was a huge problem when we should have continued after that point. And the fact that it was mismanaged to the point where the military left before the civilians did is a travesty. And it's going to probably, I hope not, I pray that it doesn't lead to the biggest hostage crisis in American history. It might. I don't want to think like that. But it's shaping up to be. I don't trust the Taliban to bring those people back to safety. And there's some people are saying it's 40,000. And if that's true, it'd be the biggest hostage situation by a long shot of American history. So,
Right.
pointless war that led to a disgusting end, and one that we're gonna have to try and figure out how to solve, which is not. It's not gonna be fun.
John,
And now we'll move on to our next topic,
Which is I'm going to bump up the third topic to the second topic, and so moving on. I saw a piece in the news about how President Biden wants to end the the unemployment benefits by September, despite the article headline said, despite the surge in the Delta variant. Now, I had made a point. I run the Gab. You think the head publicist would run something. That that one problem with Republic is that leaders can come in and they can just come up with monetary policy and then they leave because they don't have to deal with long-term consequences, and they also don't personally fund a state. Um, although that wasn't really the point I made in that Gab post. Something that old monarchies did, especially back when the state had a lot less expense in general, is that the monarch would actually be the one to fund a lot of what the government did on a national level through his own estates, right? So imagine if we had a king in the United States today, and all of the federal land, which is supposedly the public patrimony and it all belongs to us and all that wonderful nonsense that isn't actually true, because you try to build a log cabin in a national park and and see what happens. You ain't making it out. If the king owned all of that land, and with all the land that the Forest Service rents out for farming and all the Bureau of Land Management rents out for mining, all that profit was from the king. If we were like went to the king, if we were like how these old monarchies were set up, the king would use that to fund what he needed, right? So Charles I, when he didn't have parliament for 10 years, he was basically funding everything through the taxes that already existed, like shipping taxes and whatnot, and his own private estates. He only needed to reconvene parliament when the Scottish Protestants got upset over some liturgical matter that Charles wanted to enforce upon them. So, and that's why he had to reconvene Parliament, and that would eventually lead to the English Civil War, which would eventually lead to Charles I getting his head chopped off. God rest his soul. But yeah, so I guess to make this point, monarchs have to be financially responsible, because if they don't, they're going to face consequences. Louis XVI in France, one of the Great Hunger, which is one of the caveats, to this French Revolution, he couldn't do what he normally did because his credit, he would either open the royal granaries in those times, or he would take a loan to buy grain. But the problem is that because of his involvement in the American Revolution, his line of credit was basically tapped out because of all the other debts that France had accumulated. The monarchy, because they were responsible, they got the burden of it. But in our republics, Lyndon B. Johnson never had to pay for the economic devastation that he wrought upon our country, because it happened 10 years after him, right? His Great Society set things in motion that would eventually lead to an economic downturn. But he was already out of office, so it doesn't really particularly matter. And this is a problem with Republic in general, and that they can spend to their heart's content and they can make all these wishful promises, but they're not going to be the ones to have to pay the bill. And whereas in monarchy, you have the king who is, if because he lives longer, right? Either it's going to be him who's paying the bill or his sons who are going to be paying the bill, and that's going to make them think a bit. Now, obviously, there are exceptions. Louis XIV's, extravagance and all the wars that he was fighting and building Versailles, which was a massive undertaking. It just, obviously there are exceptions to that, rule. But generally speaking, I think even as recently as like 1906 or something, according to Charles Coulomb, the Grand Prince of Liechtenstein at the time basically sold off a bunch of his assets to keep Liechtenstein above water rather than having the government of Liechtenstein itself go into bankruptcy. So, monarchy, generally speaking, is more fiscally responsible and doesn't accrue all of these debts. Well, traditional monarchy. I'm not talking about British crown republicanism, which is essentially what they have, as opposed to a constitutional monarchy. Yeah.
Anyway,
Okay, so Charles, and then Victor, and then William, and then me. I think is that how we're going?
Yeah, Victor, then William, then you, because you're our boss, so therefore you naturally get to go last, because that's how hierarchy works, I guess.
well,
Upside down hierarchy, Cake.
okay,
Yeah.
so we're talking about monarchy being better than a republic.
Yeah, fiscally speaking.
Fiscally speaking, yes. So I think we also have to look at, in our very own revolution against England, France essentially emptied their coffers before that to fight in the French and Indian War, which is our theater of the 7 Years' War, and lost. So the French crown was in a whole lot of debt because Louis agreed to help us revolt against the British crown, the illegitimate holder of the British crown, but I digress. Because he offered to do that, it plunged the French crown into even more debt. And he had to suffer the consequences of those actions in the French Revolution, which was probably the most disastrous thing to have ever happened in human history.
Second worst.
So it is not really fair to say that it's not really fair to say that a monarch will automatically be better, but about at least more than half the time a monarch would be better than an elected leader in terms of fiscal stuff, simply because he has to suffer consequences directly for his actions. But that's not the case all the time, as I just laid out. William?
Now, I have two things. First thing, I'm going to single out the Republican Party a little bit. These guys claim to be the party of fiscal responsibility, but they worship Ronald Reagan, the guy who created the concept of the blank check financial policy, the guy who got us over $3 trillion in debt,
Yeah.
and basically is the guy who created the perpetual military-industrial complex that's allowing Lockheed Martin to basically milk the federal government and the taxpayer for money, trying to build a jet that hasn't been built in 20 years.
Well, I mean, I would say that the military-industrial complex really started after World War II, is when we should have scaled it back. It just got worse. But I mean, the thing with that is that the problem with the Republican Party is that they want to cut taxes, which is great. I think that the amount of money that's going to each level of government really is the reverse. Because generally speaking, because I believe as a Catholic in the concept of subsidiarity, the idea that problems should be solved on the localist level possible, right? So, you can solve the problem, your family, your friends, your neighbors, then the city, and then the county and whatnot. Most of our tax revenue really should be going to the city and then to the county, right? Generally speaking, obviously in times of national emergency, you got to increase military spending. But I'm all for cutting taxes. Was the point? But the Republican Party, and this is one of the things that because they appeal to the voters with the cut taxes thing, right? Whereas the Democratic Party appeals to the voters with increased welfare and other spending things. But the problem is that the Republicans want to cut taxes, but they never cut the budget because it's all great to say, oh, we don't want to spend money on this. But when it comes to actually cutting programs, they know they're going to lose votes if they want to get rid of Social Security or any of the other welfare states, which, by the way, even discounting Social Security, which I think is like basically a quarter of the budget itself at this point. Even discounting Social Security, all the rest of our welfare programs are about a quarter of the U.S. national budget every year in a normal year, not counting all the pandemic stuff, right? So like 2019. Yeah. So so the Republican Party wants to cut taxes, but never cut the budget. The Democratic Party raises taxes, but they never raise them enough to cover their increased spending or the current deficit. So the Democratic Party appeals to voters by promising to
And of course,
spend more, but the Republican Party appeals to voters by saying we'll spend less, but we'll tax you less. But they never want to balance the budget and get into a position where we actually are making enough money to not just pay off the interest on our debts,
and you want to know
and
how
actually,
the Democrats keep their voters? They keep their voters because they can say that, oh, we wanted to tax more, but the Republicans blocked our efforts to tax more.
and the Republicans will say, "Oh, we would totally have cut taxes. Yeah, I mean, we totally would have cut spending. Yeah, if the Democrats would have let us." Which both cases are bold-faced lies.
And my second point was this phenomenon doesn't just apply to fiscal matters. It applies to basically every political matter in the US government. Bad policy in general is allowed to happen because elected leaders in the Republican system can leave office, and whenever the policy falls through, whether it be 5 years, 10 years, or 20 years, it's immediately put on the shoulders of whatever poor saps in power then, and nobody goes back to think it's like, hey, wouldn't it be the problem with the guy who originally put the bill in the law in the first place?
Yeah,
And not the guy who's having to clean up the mess now? No.
yeah. Hoover.
God forbid people be responsible for their governing policies in a Republican system.
Yeah, Hoover was all the blame was put on Hoover for when the the 19 stock market crash happened and everything, but that wasn't his fault. Now, don't get me wrong. I think he tried to do good, but I think that his response to it was still bad. It was essentially a smaller scale thing with what we would eventually see under the FDR administration, which arguably I think is the earliest you can say that the constitutional system really started to break, with how FDR did all these things to try and get his New Deal passed that wasn't strictly speaking constitutional, like where there's nowhere in the Constitution does it give the federal government the power to create a welfare system, and yet the Social Security Administration. But anyways,
Anyway, John, do you want to?
Yeah, let me put a bow on this. And the thing is, I actually, in some instances, I like Reagan, but there were problems. See, this is what happens when you deal with many, with the many presidents that we've have. And this is for Republican and Democrat alike. They can always cash a check, and they don't need to worry about everything's off credit. And we've already established this, but both the good and the bad with a monarch, it's directly attributed to them. And I think that makes it easier to either remove that monarch or uplift that monarch. So if, say, and now it can be done a lot less violently and a lot more, by the books. We have things like impeachment and things like that. Peaceful removal is a very good concept now. We can actually remove people. But the thing about republicanism is you have problems that it
Like impeachment, like the
else. So, what's up? You were saying? You cut out a little bit.
You were cutting out a little bit. What
Okay,
point were you
so
trying to make?
what's up?
Well, I think
Um,
I think he was trying to make the point that impeachment is all very well and good, but with Republican lowercase r politicians, they're going to be out of office, so you can't really impeach him at that point.
yeah.
Although
So the longer
President
you're
Trump is any
in,
precedent,
yeah,
apparently he can.
yeah. Like the
Okay.
longer a leader, and this is the problem. Another problem, like with what Hamilton said, the bigger a republic gets, the harder it is to maintain. Republics were never designed to be this big, and I like the idea of a small representative body, but when you have representatives going to Washington, which is thousands of miles away, by the way, and making laws for the entire country defeats the entire point of who they're supposed to be representing, because they're so like the taller a republic gets, the harder it is for a republic to represent adequately their own people.
Yes.
And then you have a national government that's just out of control and basing everything off essentially credit, because they can do whatever they want in the moment, and then once they're out of office, um, even though they might get blamed, like Trump was blamed for, probably will get blamed for Afghanistan, they don't have to face the consequences. Because if it was actually their fault, they're not there.
Yeah.
And
And
you can say whatever you
Right,
want. It's like, whose
blame.
fault is it anyways? But with a monarch, he would be there from beginning to end, and the full truth could come out, and an impeachment or whatever can go wherever it'll go, in a proper manner. But with republicanism, it's just kicking the ball down the court, and it's the
Yeah.
same way with and that goes for monetarily. We're headed for a big collapse, and it's not good. But a monarch would be able to see that, and he'd probably be out before he could. He would probably find every way he could possibly, um, everything he could possibly do to prevent it, and step down or something like that, or will be impeached. It's
yeah.
squarely on his shoulders as opposed to dispersed, and you don't really know who's to blame for it. With a monarch, you know who's to blame for it,
And
and
All
if
right.
it's good, you
And
know who's to blame for it.
and
all
another
right.
It's pretty sweet.
and
All
another
right.
thing,
We'll move on. I think we should
well,
move on to our last topic now.
oh, okay. So our final
If
topic.
there's any, well, I was gonna say if
Well, I
there's
thought
any
we were saving
questions
it,
on it.
all of them for the end.
Oh yeah, yeah. There
Yeah.
we go.
Well, I guess the final comments on this topic. Um, one thing that I kind of realized, it used to be that back in the days when we actually cared about usury, if you wanted to have a loan, you would have to put up something collateral that was of value proportional to the loan that you wanted to take out, right? So if I wanted to borrow $100 off of John here, I would have to put up as collateral, let's say like $300, because I know this. I have a Lego pirate ship from 1993, the Skull's Eye schooner. Last time I checked, when I bought it, it was like $300, right? So if I'm borrowing from the Bank of John, I would have to put that up as collateral. Now, if I defaulted on that loan, then he would get that ship and he would sell it, right? And if he sold it for like say $370, then he would give me the $70, because that's just how the system worked. Nowadays, in our modern usury economy, the government doesn't have to put up collateral even, and and if they did, they're going to be physically limited to the amount of money they can spend, because there ain't $22 trillion of collateral that the federal government just has if we default on our debts to give out our debtors. Like, what are we going to give them? The entire country? I mean, of course,
Yeah,
it's
you
more of a
can't
rant
point the
against.
finger. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, that's
Yeah,
more of a rant
exactly.
against our modern money economy and usury, but you know.
Yeah, it's just like a republic, kind of like whose finger do you point? Like, who do you point to? Like, there's no one to point to and say, "Hey, you were the person that ruined this economy. Get out of here." You know, and there's no real. It's like, what are we gonna do? Drain Washington of every person that's ever done anything bad? We'd have to get out millions of people, and like maybe dig out a few graves, you know, to get to the root of the problem. Because like you know, we'd have to like dig up, you know, Wilson or whoever, well, the thing is, you'll never get to the person that's to blame for it. At least within our lifetimes, you know, within our generation. It's like, who's the blame for, you know, the stock market crash or you know, the Great Depression? Who's to blame for it? It's like you have three or four presidents that are there, and you want to condemn all of them, or you want to condemn one of them, or you want to have that debate. With a monarch, it'd be one monarch, and he was, it's squarely on him what happened. And
Of course.
you know,
I mean, I say we just, for all time, for all future economic crises, we all just put the blame on President Wilson, and then whoever else is responsible.
yes, yes.
Nobody likes Wilson.
You can
Yeah,
blame
dig
a
him
lot
up.
of stuff on Wilson. I mean,
It's
the
like
dude,
what they did with the Pope. Yeah. What
the
were you
dude
saying?
resegregated the federal government. The federal
Ooh,
government
that's gross.
unsegregated, and Wilson said, "Not anymore. Racism is back on the menu."
Yeah,
He also made states useless. He made states completely useless because of his introduction of income tax. Because traditionally it was the states grant money to the federal government, and that had always worked. We fought a civil war with that system, but Wilson reversed that, and now income tax can be reached straight out of, and this goes against subsidiarity, but we don't really care about subsidiarity because we're a top-heavy republic, and when you have a tower tall enough, it's going to fall over. And
and income tax was sold to the government, the federal government, on the premise that, you know, if we issue prohibition, we're not going to get all that beer tax. And then after prohibition, we kept the income tax and the beer tax. Yay!
Yeah. National taxes are the most inefficient thing I've ever seen. Because the whole point of taxes is your tax money goes into the state that can directly help you. Because the state can more directly, or at least the old ways, more directly could help you, as opposed to a president. Like, you know, the state had more ability to fix your roads, to do all this stuff, and now they're constantly having to get bailed out by the government, and they keep them barely afloat and do all this stuff, and income tax is able to essentially make states useless. But whatever, that's kind of off the point. But you know,
I think we're
because we're kind of running long.
Yeah, we're running low on time, so let's talk about the last topic very quickly here. Here, Charles, go ahead.
Okay, so just in general, our sad decay in church and state, which props on you, Jacobite, to know where I pulled that little lyric from. Separation of church and state, and this is something that I've only come to recently. You can't actually have it. You know, the health of one will affect the other. And when our founding fathers, I do respect them on a way that if I wasn't an American and in the exact same position, like if I was a Canadian or a British person or a Frenchman or a German, I probably wouldn't. But I can't help.
I mean, you can respect them and not agree with everything.
Yeah, and I agree.
I respect.
Yeah, but the thing is, when they said Congress shall make no law establishing religion, right? This different states up until like the 1810s or 1820s, they had you know, their own, you know, established religions as well. But Obviously, if any state tried to do that today, like let's say, my home state of Michigan just became suddenly a bunch of it became a Catholic state, and we wanted to amend the state constitution to say Catholicism is a state religion, you guaranteed that the Supreme Court would ignore all precedent and throw that out and say, oh, the state government can't do that.
There's actually quite a few Catholics. I don't know if they'd actually go with Catholicism
Well,
on that, but yeah.
Yeah, well, I'm just saying in a hypothetical. But
Yeah.
but when we tried to remove religion, the mistake is we thought we could do it, and we could create a society where truly, regardless of creed, it's Masonic. It's an idea that what you believe doesn't actually matter. It's just your conduct. Like, conduct over creed is a fundamentally stupid idea, because even if that doesn't necessarily matter in the present life, it surely is going to matter in the next. But the thing is that we replaced Christianity, and in our homeland's case with Protestant Christianity, of varying assortments, from sort of high church Protestantism, like with Episcopalianism,
Yeah,
and then low church Protestantism with,
Well,
and then
American
eventually Puritanism, which eventually decayed into Unitarianism. Um, with that, when we tried to separate church from state, what filled the void, especially in the immediate post-war, when was this essentially the prototype for what we have now, this wokeism, where now we have these mockeries of the seven sacraments, the church, and I can pinpoint at least three of them. Abortion is one of these sacraments of this new state religion, that we try to that has been invented in our absence of any actual religion, and that is a mockery of baptism, because baptism is supposed to give new life, and this is killing it. And then gay marriage is obviously their mockery of marriage in general. Now, obviously, there's going to be a lot of disagreement on that one, I can tell. And their mockery of the sacrament of confession is when somebody gets canceled, they so they'll oftentimes make this apology. But whereas when you confess your sins and you're truly repentant and you're sorry, and the priest gives you absolution and you do the penance, you're absolved. It doesn't matter what you say when you apologize profusely. And and the thing is even there, you always get the tone that they're not actually genuinely sorry, especially when they come up with excuses for why they did what they did, right? So there's probably other violations of mockeries of the seven sacraments that if I try hard enough, I could think. But the decay of religion and its place in our society has led to the decay of the republic, and then the decay of the republic has led to the decay of established religion, and the health of one is going to affect the health of the other. And if Catholicism in America sees a rebounding, and the young generation truly rises up, and we start to rebuild the church, then we're going to have a positive impact, especially on the local level, as we become more conscious of what our faith actually teaches, and we try to exercise that in the public life. And that will have, as opposed to this negative cycle, will have a positive cycle.
So,
Yeah.
okay, so I just wanted to bring in some historical context here. The separation of church and state was a concept coined by, I want to say, Thomas Jefferson, in a letter to somebody, saying there's a wall of separation between church and state. That phrase does not exist in the Constitution or the Bill of Rights.
But interestingly, though, the term church and state, the earliest uses of it that I know of, and there's probably earlier usage, is actually that Jacobite song that I was referencing. It's called "A
Yes,
Wah Wakes a
of
Wah."
course.
And
Of course, and I was
So-
referencing the first usage of the term in American
Well, yeah.
parlance.
Well, yeah, but I mean, the even back then, as opposed to the term being first used as saying that these two concepts should be separated, it was just in the song "Wah Wigs Wah," a sad decay in church and state surpasses my describing, right? The the two are just linked, and it's sort of supposed to be obvious to the listener that these two concepts are just linked together. That he didn't say our sad decay in the state is surpassing my describing, or the church. He's just saying that um it's just they're integrally linked. And also, William has informed me that we have just hit 100 Twitter followers, and on our Gab we're still at 0.
Oh, nice. Congratulations.
Blood.
Okay, so I guess
And-
Victor, if you want to
and
make something because you're
Hopefully we'll hit 100 on YouTube. After we
Yeah.
Okay, all right. I wanted to make, okay, so given the historical context, the Chief Justice John Marshall, I believe it was him, who actually was the first one to use that. We have the Establishment Clause and Free Exercise Clause in the First Amendment. Congress shall not pass any law prohibiting or promoting a particular religion or prohibiting the free exercise thereof. So, in order for lack of separation, you would functionally have to get rid of the religion clauses out of the First Amendment in order for that to happen, and good luck getting that done. But I think that a separation of church and state as a concept is flawed because of the reasons that Charles stated, and we will go to William now.
Cricket.
Personally, this is my personal philosophy, but I do my best to try and keep my religion and my politics separate, just because I personally believe that politics is inherently a very, very dirty, messy business, and I don't want to sully the word of God with mortal affairs. But I also feel that religion is very important in setting a moral compass, and that it is very hard to separate religion from state, because those who make the laws will inevitably take religious values into the legislating room with them.
Well, that's where I have to disagree, because the thing is that Christ in the gospel, he says, these rules, and he says things that, we should do. And the fact is that we have an obligation to try and bring about, what, these things, right? So when he's, talking about divorce and such, because he said that, we kind of have an obligation to make laws, divorce laws, that reflect that nature, that reflect, what Christ said in the gospel and what the law, that God has laid down to us is. And, when you remove separation of church and state, even though everybody who came up with the concept of no fault divorce was probably raised Christian, they decided to take it upon themselves to come up with no fault divorce. And that's just one example, in comparison, and so I don't think that we should separate religion from our politics, because yes, politics is a dirty, rotten business, but the thing is that we should try and elevate. We shouldn't. That doesn't mean that by using religion with politics, we're lowering religion down to our level. We're trying to elevate our politics and our laws to the level of the divine. Well, not to the level of divine, but we want this to be close. We want man's law, even though man's law is not the eternal law. We want our law to be as close as possible to that eternal law. And that is, and this is where we come in culturally speaking, because Catholics culturally speaking, not so much in America, but in culturally Catholic countries, even if they're not Catholic, we have this sort of my way or the highway approach, where you know, obviously we have to be right because because we have one single body that determines these things. Whereas Protestantism being sort of born out of compromise, like it never ceases to amaze me with the whole Church of England thing, where Henry VIII and other succeeding monarchs apparently had to work with Parliament. Parliament wouldn't work with them unless they adopted more radical more radical Protestant elements. The fact that the Church of England theology is born of compromise is absolutely hilarious to me. Political compromise. But you see, that's where we're going to disagree, William, because as a Catholic, I'm very single-minded that, obviously one church and all of that, and therefore it's very obvious to me what the proper social, and what the proper moral laws are. But that's just my Catholic state thing kicking in.
Yeah, I'm gonna
Wow.
be kind of in the middle, but is there anything else, William?
Well, for my brief rebuttal, that's the big part where you and I are different, Charles. You're very, very staunch on your Catholic principles, and I respect that. But me, being inherently an engineer by trade, I'm more pragmatic than idealistic.
Oh, are you want to let me guess? You would agree to design by committee?
Cool. Well, let's go with let's skip over to John now, so we can get to this. Take some
What
Q&A. And
after I just gave that massive insult and without even giving him a chance to.
I don't even know what design by committee means.
Well, okay, so it's a joke, at least among naval historical circles, that some of the worst ships ever, like warships, were designed by committee. The idea that we've laid out these specific
There wasn't a
requirements, but rather than
central,
handing them off to one
you
guy,
know,
with one guy with a vision, we're gonna have to hand it off to a bunch of guys and have them work it out. So everything's gonna be compromised, and there's no single vision, and it's just gonna be a giant mess, right? This is why, like, any movie that has more than 15 directors, this is why you see movies with 15 directors, and they're all
directed
awful.
by committee. Yeah.
So
That's something that I heard of recently.
So
that I'm not gonna get into. This is not what this is about. This is about church and state. Okay. I think a state religion can be okay. But my big caveat here is that religion can be endorsed, but it should not, there should be no, let's say, you can enforce the positive of religion without negatively affecting the detractors of that religion. So what I mean by that is there you can say if the state religion was Catholicism, and if you were a Protestant, I don't think that you should be restricted as a citizen or restricted as a human being unless you want to stage like a revolution or something. It's, you know what I mean? Like, and this comes from what Charles was talking about. Like, if there is a problem, it's only acceptable if a imminent threat is apparent that we should infringe on the rights of others, I guess. Like if communists are staging a revolution, then we can, go after the communist. But if there's just a communist existing in our country, that's okay, as long as they're not trying to overthrow the government. and that goes to the same thing. Like, what is justifiable in that way? I think the problem that arises when we put a wall up between church and state. Now, I like Jefferson in some ways. This is one of the areas that we were talking about earlier, where I like certain parts of what the founders had to say, but I don't like certain things they had to say either. And this is one of those things where there needs to be a healthy relationship between the dominant religion of a country and the state. And this happens in the medieval ages, where you had anti-popes being propped up by emperors, and there was a very antagonistic, religion and state were at each other, and that's never
Yes.
good. That's terrible, and that's where you get, and that sprouted up out of the British mindset, where you had a lot more religious conflicts between the Puritans and the Anglicans and the Catholics, all in England, fighting over England. So that's where you get that from, and that's where separation of church and state comes from, at least for the most part, is that idea that the majority religion, the supported, sponsored majority religion, needs to infringe on the rights of the minority. And that's not what, and that's something I will agree with the founders on, that the dictates of the majority should not directly overtake the minority opinion. Now, you can lift up the right ideas without tearing down the wrong ones. And
Well, yeah,
that's where I sit at it, saying that this is a very complicated way of saying state religions should not enforce that everybody. First of all, it's going to be an impossibility to have everybody of a country be a certain way. But they should uplift a certain that religion, not necessarily. I'd say enforce it. They would hold it up. So, and that comes out of like a sort of conflict of church and state, where they're bullying each other, and it's kind of like a conflict. Like, different classes have to be at odds with each other, different ethnicities have to be at odds with each other, different religions have to be necessarily at odds with each other. Now, now there needs to be dialogue, and there needs to be a line where you say, okay, there's something wrong here. We need to defend our country and defend our religion. But generally speaking, if they're not posing an existential threat to the United States or any country, they should be able to worship how they please. And as long as they accept, and as long as they understand that the majority or the sponsored religion in the country is not what they prescribe, that's where I stand at it. It doesn't have to be one and the same. That becomes a problem when you have theocracies. I don't believe in necessarily theocratic. I believe a synergy of sorts is needed, and a friendly relationship is needed between any religion and any state, because religion is a major cultural, item that needs to be respected when you're dealing with a populace. If you don't do that, it leads to problems, because you have conflict
Of
and all that stuff, and
Of course, and I think on that point, we're gonna have to. Sorry for cutting you off, but we're running on time.
I can't believe it, man.
yeah,
I'm kidding.
yeah.
It's fine.
Yeah, round of might.
I was just
He's had his hand raised for a long time, but it's
Yeah,
really late.
yeah. We
So
can.
unfortunately,
I've finished up. That was my
finished up?
last real point.
he's
Yeah.
gonna have to be the only one of y'all that gets to speak, unless any of you.
I can look through the chat if anybody has anything, and we can quickly comment on something like that while he's speaking.
So
Let me
Okay,
go through the
one of
chat
them-
and see if anybody's put anything down.
Bushlight, you have been waiting for a very long time. Go ahead.
Okay, so my question is like a couple questions, and I have some remarks as well. The
okay.
first one about the Afghanistan thing, and since with two monarchies, one the religious one, and like from the emirate of Afghanistan now, and the monarchy that was like that hasn't been in existence since a long time ago. Would that be counted as kind of what we could probably say a Jacobite, like almost like equal to the Jacobites, or the and or if you want to compare it to the Carlists, would
Well,
that be kind of like concerned? And plus, if I'm but like I've seen like the hypocrisy of like some of the Republicans and the Democrats as well. But it just seems they're both both hypocritical in like a lot of things, like especially on budget and especially on a lot of things. And but I forgot what I was about to say as well.
I mean, when it comes to the Jacobitism thing, I mean, legitimate monarchy is legitimate monarchy. Like, Jacobite philosophy isn't just this guy should be on the throne. It's also a belief in the divine right of kings and sort of subsidiarity and all this. But the lawful monarch is the lawful monarch, and I don't think that necessarily changes just because he's ousted. And legitimacy, besides God coming down from the heaven or giving some other sign, like the Jacobite heirs, after the Great Usurpation, historically the kings of England were able to cure the king's evil. I can't remember what we call it now, but it's this affliction. Um, but the Hanoverians, or the usurpers, they weren't able to do that, but the Jacobite claimants were. So that seems to me a clear indication that they had the divine right. But I don't really see. I mean, my sympathies lie with the old monarchy, not the new emirate. Partly because I just don't like. It's partly because, generally speaking, as a rule of thumb, the old people who were in charge, at least in Western Catholic monarchies, the older, more senior branch. Well, these aren't two branches of the same family, but is generally the more is generally the better one, I guess. Like with the Carlos, and then you have the more senior House of Bourbon, which and whatnot. Yeah, so my Jacobite sympathies tell me to sympathize with the older Afghan monarchy, and because I don't. And then there's also the question: do these guys have a divine right, even though they're not, Christian in any sense? I mean, So my sympathies lie with that from the Jacobite standpoint. And also I feel like, now I don't know that much about the old monarchy, but I feel like if they were actually restored, they'd be more in the situation of the King of Jordan, where he's also kind of the protector of the Christians within his kingdom, the small minority that exists. But that's just speculation on my part. What were any of your other questions?
I had one. I can't remember what I was thinking. Oh wait, also I just got a remark on it as well. But
Okay.
like I just got a notification from one of the news apps that Caliphate has now at least posted some videos mocking the United States military of with their uniforms and such because they got captured the weapons.
Yeah,
But
it just goes back to incompetency. It's a sad situation.
like most of the presidents, like the past two presidents, both Biden and Trump, kind of did badly with Afghanistan. Like we shouldn't have, at least if we were gonna plan to do it, we should have at least told the Afghanistan government at least what were our plans beforehand and tried to see if we left like some troops behind just for like secure defense of Kabul. But we didn't do that.
Thank
We just
you.
left them.
Thank you very much.
We have
will-
there are a few questions that I can just say, and then Michael
Hello,
has a
Michael.
question, and then there's one question that was texted to me, so I'll just say that after Michael.
Hello?
And then we'll
Yeah.
just
Okay, Michael.
welcome.
Yeah, I have a question in regards to what kind of monarchy do you guys even want for America? Because I know some people want to go back to the Commonwealth while others want a monarchy within the United States, essentially just replacing the republic with like either a constitutional monarchy or some radicals want like the absolute monarchy with the divine right of kings from
Me
hundreds of years
personally,
ago.
because I've given a lot of mixed, what might seem on the surface, I guess, is mixed signals. I am in favor of technical absolutism under the Jacobite claim, where ultimately speaking, all worldly authority lies with the king, where he's only subject to God
If I had to
and the
choose
church.
one, I would
Okay.
say that it had to be an enlightened constitutional monarchy under an American monarch. It can't be a foreign monarch or loyalty to like the crown from another country because we're not
Yeah,
Canada at the
I
same
do.
time. It would
Well, I
also
mean,
Yeah,
win
I
out in the
do have
population
a
war.
unique view. Yeah,
It's the
I
more
have a
likely,
unique
most
view.
likely outcome as well
Yeah,
in such
I'm
a
in the
society.
center. Because the current president is kind of
Like, I'm not in
has a lot
favor of
more
monarchy
power.
myself. Like, I'm
Oh,
just
okay.
saying that like I can accept monarchy if it was the norm. That's just basically how I am. But
Um,
technically, I'm not a monarchist. I'm a
essentially,
liberal.
yeah. Okay.
All right.
Um,
Next is
yeah, my
next to speak.
opinion. Okay. What's up?
Next to speak is Joe Capre. Joe, thank you very much, Michael.
And the between. Let me see if I can find this. Let me see if I can find the one that was sent.
After Joe will be
It
Vincent.
was like, what is? Okay, I couldn't find it. The guy that
I was just gonna answer Michael's question about.
I believe it had something to do with constitutionalism. Were you the one that posted that? I don't know who posted the one about constitutionalism, but it's gone now. I was about to say that one. But
I was just gonna.
what you had to say?
I was just gonna share what my vision of a monarchy in the U.S. would be like.
Oh, okay, okay.
As
Next
long as
up is Vincent.
wait, no,
What's up?
we'll let Joe say his.
As long as
Okay.
it can be pretty short.
Yeah,
Mine's just a semi-constitutional.
yeah. I mean, mine would probably be defined as semi-constitutional because I guess the parliament would be called every once in a while. John, you're kind of.
Yeah, he's kind of new to.
John.
I mean, the president currently is basically an elected yeah. I mean, basically, the president now is already kind of a. Oh, what's up? Is my mic poofed?
Your mic was kind of cutting out, but it's better now.
Oh no, my mic's out. Oh yeah, I'm semi-constitutional. I couldn't get into the details. The president's a constitutional elected monarchist, so that was what I wanted to say before my mic poofed out. Vincent, what's up? Second time on here.
Yeah, well,
What's up?
that's
dude?
right. The first thing I'll say is that I may have offered commentary earlier, or I may have asked questions earlier, but the truth of the matter is I've been kind of dipping in and out of this session, just because it seems like whenever I tune in, the discussion is about Jacobites or the Catholic Church or something that I don't know anything about and isn't relevant to the conversation we're trying to have.
I mean, that's fine. The nature of the podcast.
Well, and do with that
it's fine.
like.
It's whatever.
I would like to comment on the format of the podcast, but that's not really my role. What I will tell you about is I'll read out for you a post that I made earlier that I think is relevant to our discussion, specifically about Afghanistan and about what it.
I think I saw that one.
But yeah, well, let me read it out for you for the benefit of anyone else who might be listening. Which is that I state here that I would contest that the hasty withdrawal from Afghanistan carried out under the Biden administration is a classic example of what we call partisan political expediency dictating policy. The public has been asking for withdrawal from Afghanistan for many years now, and I think Biden thought that he would win political capital, that is, favor with the public, by carrying out a quick withdrawal. Now, because it was intended to be quick and to satisfy that impulse, it was not done in a realistic and controlled manner, and what we're seeing now is the consequence of politics coming before common sense in the making of foreign policy, something that I don't believe will happen in a monarchy, and if it is, it won't be this egregious. But I do have an actual question for you. which is in reference to some comments that were made maybe half an hour or an hour ago now, which is specifically, are you in favor?
Stuff.
Oh, absolutely. Well, I try my best. But I want to know, are you in favor of downsizing the military and, Social Security? And the reason I name those two is because they are the biggest money pits in America right now. And I'm asking you those questions in reference to the discussion of monarchist fiscal responsibility that y'all had earlier, specifically the idea that we would put an end to debt spending and that we would be able to use a combination of taxation and federal land revenue to finance the state. That would mean massive cutbacks because we are so deep in the red right now. And so I just want to know, where do you imagine those cuts being made?
Going in the order, I think that except in times of war, um, deficit spending is not a good idea. So I would make those cutbacks in the welfare state, specifically, Social Security. The idea being that if these programs should exist at all, they really should be like in the olden days, back when people would tithe 10% to the parish. People wouldn't be on welfare; they'd be on the parish. The idea that these programs should exist on the localist level possible, if they do, and mainly should be in the hands of the church. So the welfare state would certainly be my biggest cutback, although that would unfortunately probably have to be a slow waning off because you can't just immediately transition from one order to the other usually. So it'd be a slow waning off of trying to build up that culture of tithing to the parish, and then the parish actually rebuilding the infrastructure of actually being the center of charitable donations. So yeah, the military, in terms of our federal spending, I kind of wish that would be the last thing we cut, because at least because of our immediate short-term, geopolitical situation, we have the Red Chinese are our second biggest threat. Our internal divisions that are ripping the country apart are our biggest threat. But the Chinese, in terms of actual foreign countries, the Chinese are our biggest threat, and they're increasing military spending and stealing our tech all the time. So I am not opposed to the idea of cutting military spending, but that would be the last thing of the federal thing. It's the federal spending that I would cut, but once again, I'm not opposed to it. But welfare first. Victor?
I'm just going to say that that we need to make our military spending less about how much we spend, but how efficiently it's spent. If we can make our military efficient, it doesn't have to be as large as it is. And that is just my 2 cents. William?
I agree with you 100%, Victor. The way the U.S. military spends money is insane. It's constantly being poured into private contractors for contracts that are never seen through, or buying replacement parts and equipment for exuberant prices. At my last job, I worked with a lot of veterans, and one of the things they used to tell me is how their officers would give them their allowances to go get supplies, and they'd say, spend this much money, not a cent more, not a cent less. We need to start incentivizing our military staff and our soldiers on how to find ways to effectively limit spending and start cutting back on how much we are spending.
Can I interest you in a $30 can of Coca-Cola?
Anyway, John?
I'm no economist, but I would say getting our troops back home, the first good step would be to reduce our involvement, not necessarily our size, our bases across the world, all this stuff, the maintaining of a global, essentially an empire with bases spread across Europe, across the Middle East, and all these different, we're sustaining a lot. So if we
Your mic is
move
cutting out a lot,
I guess our
and
bases, and this would take a little bit at first. But if we start to move our people closer to home, we'd maybe have a chance to reduce this size. Well, I'm not necessarily interested in increasing the size of the military, but I think, like what Victor. Okay.
Yeah, John's.
I
we're losing
agree with
John's mic here. Does that answer your?
If I'm cutting out. I agree with
no, you're back now.
That's
Yeah.
salvageable. We need to spend it more efficiently. Am I gone? Yeah. I agree with Victor and William. Move people back to America,
Yeah.
do all this stuff, and be efficient.
Yeah.
Lower our involvement, whatever.
It was too much for the mic to front
Sorry,
bear.
cut out my detailed talk
do
about
you
it.
have anything
That
else?
answer your
Vincent?
question,
We'll
Bishop?
never hear your we'll never cross your
For the
but
sake of
whatever.
for the sake
Yeah,
of
it was too much.
brevity, no. I would leave it at that.
Okay.
All right, thank you, William. That was a
Thank you.
great talk.
And where we can discuss this at a later point, Vincent.
Yeah.
But for now, we are out of time.
Okay, so, yes, I would like to say, for the benefit of the YouTube audience when you hear this, that I guess feel free to post your questions in the comments, because I guess we may shape. I guess we can, if it's agreeable to you guys, we can shape the show around those questions that we get.
Yeah,
and I guess
that would be cool.
Yeah. Yes, and so I was expecting this to be a 1-hour show.
Yeah, it kind
But
of went
much
out of
like
control,
the
but
military
I'm
budget,
not mad at it. I like it.
yeah, I'm not mad. I'm not bitter. It's not like I have other things to do. I'm not bitter. No.
For
Yes,
not
but
being ready for this, I'm pretty. I'm surprised it went this well. I wasn't expecting to be in an hour early. But I'm kind of happy. It was
Yeah.
Well, you only think it was an hour early because you live in Louisiana, which operates in Central Time. But
Yeah, give us the times,
We are
bro.
the
Give us the
center of
times,
the
bro.
If you
country.
don't
We are the
mind,
core of the country. I apologize. I am the.
No,
if you don't mind, I would like to close us. If you don't mind, I would like to close us off in prayer.
Okay.
In the name of the Father, and of the Son, and of the Holy Spirit. Amen. Our Father, who art in heaven, hallowed be thy name. Thy kingdom come, thy will be done on earth as it is in heaven.
Give us this day our daily bread, and forgive us our trespasses, as we forgive those who trespass against us. And lead us not into temptation, but deliver us from evil. Amen.
In the name of the Father, and of the Son, and of the Holy Spirit. Amen.
So, for Monarchist Minute, I'm Charles York.
I am Victor Smith.
I'm William Stout. Like and follow us on the social medias.
And I'm
We
John
will be joined
Arness,
next
and
week by
thank you for being here. Continue, Victor.
And our pen names.
thank you all for coming. If you want to join us live, you can be in the Monarchists of America Discord server Fridays at 8 p.m. Eastern Time.
John.
That is 7 p.m. Central Time.
Yes. So, and take care, everyone. God bless you, and may God bless the United States of America.